The tower of the Galactic Council floated above the storm line of a pale blue world, and the wind beneath it carried whispers of decisions that would shape 1,000 species. Yet the air inside was heavy with arrogance and comfort. A calm that had forgotten the cost of peace clerks moved like ghosts through wide marble halls, and the smell of metal polish lingered in the vents at the central chamber. A young alien officer named Kir watched the readouts of incoming vessels and tried to ignore the small tremor that passed through their fingers when a silent craft crossed the outer lane. It was small, unmarked, and moved with no broadcast code. Scanners tried to paint it, but the signal came back empty, as if the ship refused to exist. The shape shimmered once against the light, then fell perfectly still as if it were waiting for permission to breathe. From that ship stepped a single human wrapped in a coat, black as the night beyond the rim. His eyes were steady and tired. He walked, with the patience of someone who had rehearsed every step 1,000 times. His name was Elias Ward, Envoy of Earth, though few in that chamber believed Earth was anything more than a backwater ruin. From the old wars he bowed in the ancient style. To the speaker, and the council members leaned back in their seats smiling at what they thought was theater. Elias asked for all channels to be opened. He said the message must be heard by every free being not hidden behind walls. The speaker agreed, because she thought spectacle would make the human small she did not yet understand. The ceiling opened into light clouds, rolled apart to form a vast translucent screen across the sky, and the words of Elias carried into every street and every orbit. Station. His voice calm and low. This is the final message from Earth. He said, we have heard your warnings, your blockades, your threats, and your laughter. We have watched your fleets surround our colonies, and we have chosen restraint. But you chose war, so prepare for the consequences. The sentence hung in the air, written across every communicator, every visor, every tower wall, and it stayed there. Unblinking people in the city looked up and read it once, twice again, unable to look away. Inside the chamber, several guards received the silent order to arrest the envoy. They moved through the side corridor in perfect formation, their armor blue and shining. Kir watched their path on the display and felt their pulse quicken. Something was wrong. Every sensor around the tower began to loop coordinates every distance. Reading collapsed into zero, as if the world had folded in on itself. A shadow appeared high above the clouds, a thin black curve stretching from horizon to horizon, growing darker by the breath until it became the outline of a ship larger than logic allowed. Its hull showed no drive signature, no registry, no sound yet. The air trembled with its presence. The guards froze. One lifted a weapon, but his visor filled with new words. Corridor of mercy follow, and you will not be harmed. He lowered his arm slowly, and the squad retreated without a command. The speaker demanded to know who granted Earth authority to violate council security. Elias lifted his head, and his eyes caught the light. He said, you granted it when you turned away from truth, when you sent raiders to our borders and called it law. We did not come for conquest. We came to end the reaching of greedy hands. The counselors shouted about balance of power, about treaties that never existed. Elias simply pointed upward. The ship in the clouds tilted slightly, its silhouette slicing the sunlight like a blade, and a ripple of silence spread through the crowd outside. People began to kneel, not out of worship, but because something inside them recognized scale that their minds could not frame. Kir stepped closer to the window, their voice a whisper that no one heard. Is that Earth's fleet? Elias turned to them, as if he had heard, and said, not the fleet only. The first voice of it, a warning that speaks once and waits for choice. The speaker's staff struck the floor demanding order, but order had already left the room. She told Elias he was under arrest. He replied softly, then so is the truth. He tapped the small device in his hand, and the message wrote itself again across the clouds. Since you chose war, prepare for the consequences. This time the words burned gold before fading, leaving only the wind and the heartbeat of a world that had just realized what silence from Earth truly meant. Masks and motives. The council chamber did not sleep after the human left the tower. The sound of his words still ran through the air like low thunder that never faded. The message from Earth had reached every corner of the galactic network, and now the entire Union buzzed with questions that no one dared to answer openly. Some called it a bluff. Some called it madness, some called it prophecy, but everyone felt the same cold line run through their spine. Kier sat at their console and stared at the blank sensors where the Terran ship had been. It was gone as suddenly as it had appeared, but the instrument still showed traces in wavelengths that should not exist, like echoes of a presence too. Real to arrays in a glass room above the chamber, the speaker met with the heads of the dominant blocks. Their robes were bright, their faces proud. They spoke about damage control, about public reaction, and about how to punish Earth quickly before fear. Turned to respect a counselor from the Gen Empire, slammed his clawed hand on the table and said, "We must strike their outer colonies before they gather strength." Another from the Vorath League said, "Better yet, destroy their communications, make them vanish again like myths." The speaker listened with a calm smile and said, "We will do nothing in public until the people forget their fear. Then we will act quietly and finish the human question once and for all." She believed Earth was a single world with loud words and old relics. She did not believe in starborn fleets. She did not believe that the silence in the sky had meaning. Kier watched the diplomats leave and wondered why the air still tasted of iron. They had seen the shadow of that ship and they knew it was not imagination. They turned to the older officer beside them and asked, "What if the humans are not bluffing?" The officer laughed softly and said, "If they were, what would it change? We already live under the rule of those who choose war over wisdom. Go home. Kier, forget the humans before they make you dream the wrong kind of dream." But Kier could not forget that shadow, or the way the words "corridor of mercy" had appeared on every visor. Without warning, it was not aggression. It was a choice. It had offered peace while standing tall enough to erase a city. Kier returned to their quarters and opened a private log. They wrote of the fear they felt, and the strange admiration for a species that spoke softly, yet carried storms. They had learned at the academy that humans once destroyed themselves and then rebuilt from ashes. They wondered if that made them immune to threats. Across the stars in a quiet corner of neutral space, an admiral of the Gen Empire watched the recording. Again, the moment the human said, "Prepare for the consequences," he leaned back in his chair and laughed. He told his advisors that this was the perfect moment to break Earth's pride. The council would look away and he would strike one of their frontier colonies to prove that humans were just talk. He chose the mining moon at Ganter's Edge, a small settlement with a few thousand souls, mostly workers and families barely armed. His ships would move at dawn. He said, "No one will know until it is done, and by then the council will thank us for it." Meanwhile, Elias Ward remained within a guarded suite under political arrest. He did not resist. He sat by the window and watched the nightlights of the city below. He knew the message had been received, but he also knew pride was an old disease among stars. He whispered to himself that humans had given mercy before consequence. But mercy was never endless on a nearby console. A single coded light blinked, slowly sending an invisible signal across subspace, a signal not to Earth but to something older than any government, a network called the Starborn Oath back at the council tower. Kier was summoned by the speaker herself, a rare and dangerous honor. The speaker asked what they saw that day. She wanted to know how the Terran ship appeared so suddenly, and why their report mentioned a spatial fold with no energy signature. Kier hesitated. They said the readings were beyond known parameters. The speaker's eyes narrowed, and she said, "Tell me what you really think, not what the instruments say." Kier took a breath and said, "I think the ship wanted to be seen but not understood." The speaker frowned and said, "Then perhaps the humans have learned theater from the gods." She dismissed Kier with a wave, but her smile was too sharp to be called amused. In secret rooms hidden deep under the tower, data analysts worked to decrypt the human transmission. They found fragments of patterns that looked like coordinates written in layers of sound. When converted to images, they formed something like constellations, but arranged as warnings near every world that had supported the raids. The analysts presented it to the speaker, and she burned the report. She said, "There is no war coming, there is only fear, and I will use it before it uses us." Far away on Earth, deep beneath the surface of a gray fortress, the Starborn network came alive. Ancient nodes opened like eyes one by one. A low hum filled the oceans and the clouds turned silver for a heartbeat across every command deck of the Terran fleet. A single phrase appeared on glass screens. "Prepare corridor of mercy online. Do not fire until fired upon." The captains saluted the unseen command and waited. Back in the city, Kier could not sleep. They stood on the balcony of their small quarters, looking at the night sky, and whispered into the wind. What if the humans are right? What if the consequence they speak of is not death, but truth that we cannot hide from forever? The night answered with silence, but the stars seemed closer than before, and one of them flickered, not like a star, but like an eye watching fire on the mining moon. The mining moon of Ganter's Edge turned slowly around its parent world, its surface covered in ridges and deep scars carved by generations of drills and harvesters. Beneath the soil lay the veins of rare metals that kept half the galactic trade alive. On its dusty plains lived human settlers, families, scientists, and children who had come to build a quiet life away from the noise of the central systems. They had little more than outposts, power towers, and a small defense grid that had not been tested in years. To them, the war that others spoke of was only something that belonged to stories until the sky began to burn. The first warning came as a tremor in the magnetic field. Sensors blinked once, and then all at once sirens cried through the domes. The children in the learning hall stopped their lessons as the teacher, Marin, felt the tremor pass through the floor. She had once served in the old Terran fleet. Before retiring here, she knew the sound of engines even when wrapped in silence. She opened the shield window and saw lights descending from the night like a rain of silver teeth. She told the children to stay under their desks, and she ran to the old beacon tower that no one had touched in decades, in orbit above the moon. Admiral Vark of the Gen Empire watched the operation begin. His ships formed a crescent around the settlement, their guns armed but set to disable. He wanted prisoners, not martyrs. He believed a quick strike and a captured colony would humiliate Earth and prove to the Council that humans were not gods but dust. The flagship's crew prepared to jam all transmissions, but before the order could finish, a pulse came from the surface, and the entire comm array blinked. The beacon tower had come alive, its old circuits glowing with blue. Fire Marin reached the control platform, breath shaking, but her hands steadied the beacon. Core responded to her biometrics as if it had been waiting. She whispered her authorization code from the days of the fleet, and the system answered. Voice confirmed. Auxiliary Starborn protocol initiated. She did not fully understand what that meant. She only knew that she could feel something vast, awakening beneath the crust of the moon, like a heartbeat rising from sleep. She called to the settlement below, telling them to stay calm, to gather in shelters, to trust the oath and wait. The Gen ships began to descend, their engines glowing like suns, their sensors scanning for weapons, but the moon's surface showed nothing. The Admiral gave the order to strike the power grid and disable resistance. Then the ground opened and light poured upward, columns of soft white radiance that curved into the sky, forming a network of shields. Not mechanical but alive. The first salvo of plasma vanished against it with no explosion. The energy seemed to swallow the attack and return it as harmless light patterns dancing across the void. The crews of the invading ships stared in disbelief. Inside the command bridge of the flagship, alarms screamed as targeting systems began to rewrite themselves. Coordinates flipped direction, showing home bases instead of enemy locks. Admiral Vark demanded to know what was happening. His officers said the fire control AI was being overwritten by unknown code. It was speaking in an ancient Terran dialect, repeating the words, "Mercy corridor active, stand down, repeat, stand down." One officer panicked and fired a missile manually. It curved mid-flight and dissolved into sparks before reaching the surface. Marin watched from the tower as the defensive field shaped itself into wings spreading over the colony. Each energy arc linked to underground nodes that no human engineer had built in this generation. She realized then that the moon itself had been seeded long ago by the Starborn to appear unarmed until the day came when Earth was tested. She fell to her knees, not from fear, but from awe, because she remembered the oath whispered among Terran officers that the Starborn would never strike first, but would never fall second. The children in the hall looked out and saw the sky filled with light, and they thought it was beautiful. Not war, but something pure. The enemy ships began to break formation, their engines faltering as their own systems refused commands. Admiral Vark shouted for retreat, but his voice cracked under the weight of confusion. He had wanted victory, and now he felt like a man standing before a mirror that showed him his own smallness. His fleet began to withdraw, some ships tumbling out, Of control, others simply vanishing as if folded into space by unseen hands. On the moon's surface, the people came out of shelters and looked at the stars. The battle had lasted only minutes, and yet the silence after felt like an eternity. Marin stood by the beacon, her face lit by the soft glow of the shield. She whispered to the sky, "Thank you." Knowing someone somewhere had heard, she sent a short message into the network saying, "Colony safe defense awakened, no casualties, requesting guidance." Then the beacon light dimmed to a steady pulse as if waiting for a reply far away. In the deep dark between stars, a response began to move, a signal across invisible paths carried not by light, but by memory on Earth. The Starborn command read the signal and marked Gantor's edge as active. The Admiralty convened, and one phrase echoed through every hall: consequence phase approaching. Back on the moon, Marin gathered the children and told them stories of old Earth, of the cities that rose again. After the fires, she told them that courage was not loud, it was steady, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant that wakes only when the world forgets what peace means. And above them, the shield shimmered faintly in the night, holding a silence that was not empty but watchful. The ship with no archive. When the light of the battle faded and the smoke of the retreating fleet vanished into the void, the news of Gantor's edge spread through the galaxy like wildfire and confusion. The Gen Empire tried to hide its defeat, but every port trader and drifter carried the tale faster than any official report. They said a Terran colony had been attacked, and not a single life lost. They said the invaders' weapons had turned against themselves, and the sky had glowed like a sunrise made of judgment. The council demanded answers, the speaker raged in secret meetings, and the name Starborn began to slip from whispers into open fear. In the deep between systems where no beacon reached, a single warship drifted silent through the endless dark. It bore no markings, no registry code, and no known signature. Its hull absorbed light and returned none. Its engines burned in silence, visible only when it chose to move. The ship was called the Solace of Dawn by the few who knew it existed, and its captain was Commander Ryan Vale, a man whose name did not appear in any record. He stood on the observation deck, looking at the stars that glimmered like memories. He had fought in wars that history pretended never happened, and he had sworn the oath that bound the Starborn to act only when humanity's restraint was mistaken for weakness. The ship's crew numbered barely 100, all chosen from Earth's forgotten divisions, men and women, who had trained to make peace heavier than war. They received the signal from Gantor's edge 3 days after the battle, and the message was short. Defense awakened. No casualties, request guidance. Ryan read it in silence, then closed his eyes and said, "They have tested us. The council will choose escalation. Prepare for movement." His officers obeyed without question. The Solace of Dawn turned slowly until her nose pointed toward the center of the galaxy. At the same time, Admiral Vark's crippled fleet limped back to their home base. Every report he sent was edited by the Council's Intelligence Bureau. But rumors still escaped. His own officers whispered that their systems had been rewritten by human code older than their species. Some said the voice they heard inside their helmets spoke not in command but in forgiveness, telling them to stand down and live. Some believed the humans had used forbidden technology. Others said it was something deeper, something spiritual. The Empire demanded vengeance to erase humiliation, and so another fleet began to form, twice the size of the first one, this time with authorization to destroy, not to capture. Within the council tower, the speaker and her allies drafted a formal declaration of protection under which they would send their combined navies to ensure stability around the Terran colonies. But everyone in the chamber knew it was war hidden under diplomacy. The alien officer Kerr listened from their console and felt the air grow heavier with every false word. They had seen the shadow of that Terran ship once, and now the same shape haunted every corner of their thoughts. They opened a restricted communication line and sent a single message to the only address they had from the human envoy. The message said, "They are coming again, and I am sorry." Elias Ward sat in his guarded room when the message reached him. The guards did not see the tiny pulse that flickered across his wrist device. He read it and smiled sadly. He whispered to the empty room, "So the council has made its choice." He stood up and said quietly to himself, "Then so must we." Far out in the void, Commander Rian watched the stars shift as the Solace of Dawn entered the shadow field. Her presence removed from every network, she became invisible to all known sensors. The ship moved like a thought between folds of space. Her engines bending gravity as if it were fabric. The crew felt no acceleration, only the faint hum of the Starborn core, a machine older than their fleet. Ryan gave the order to project the signal of deterrence. The ship's systems reached into the subspace web and whispered across the entire council network a message that had no origin. Tag-only words: cease escalation. Corridor of Mercy, still open. Any attack on Terran soil will be answered. The council received the warning in the middle of their session, and panic flickered across 100 faces. They traced the message across the network, but every trace led back to them as if the system itself mocked their search. The speaker shouted that it was a trick, a human virus meant to sow fear, yet even as she spoke, the skies above the capital world darkened. Ships in orbit reported distortions. Sensors screamed of impossible gravity shifts, and when they looked up, they saw it again, a shadow the size of a mountain stretching across the stars. The Solace of Dawn had arrived without sound, without flame. Her hull shimmered like glass and darkness at once. She stood before the punitive fleet as they armed their cannons. Ryan opened a wide-band transmission, his voice steady and calm. He said, "This is Commander Ryan Vale of the Starborn Oath. Your aggression is noted. Stand down and no life will be lost. Fire once and your systems will become your own prisons." The enemy admiral laughed and gave the order to fire. The cannons roared, yet nothing reached their target. The blasts vanished into the space around the Terran ship as if swallowed by time. Then their own displays turned against them. Firing solutions reversed, engines locked, navigation loops repeating their home coordinates. The fleet began to drift helplessly, their weapons pointing back toward their own command vessels, inside the bridge of the Solace of Dawn. Ryan closed his eyes and whispered, "May mercy still be stronger than pride." His officers watched as the enemy ships shut down one by one, not destroyed, not damaged, only silenced. He then opened a channel to the council and said, "This war ends now. The corridor of mercy remains open. Earth does not seek conquest but will no longer accept lies. Tell your speaker." The stars remembered truth. Kier watched the transmission and felt their chests tighten. They understood now what power wrapped in restraint looked like. It was not rage. It was balance, and it terrified those who could not imagine power used without cruelty. The council ended the session in silence, and the speaker ordered the envoy detained again, but even she knew the tide was turning. The message had reached every corner of the galaxy, and the name Starborn was no longer a myth. It was a promise. Chains and choices. The night on the capital world stretched long and uneasy. Every tower shone with false calm. But beneath the glow, people whispered about the ship that had silenced an entire fleet without a single casualty. The council called it sabotage. The speaker called it illusion, but no one truly believed her. Even the security patrols moved slower, as if listening for something behind the wind. In the highest level of the tower, Elias Ward remained under arrest, guarded by soldiers who were told to treat him as a criminal. Though none dared to meet his eyes, he sat by the window of his small chamber, watching the city lights pulse like a heartbeat, fading and returning. He knew the next move would come soon. The council had chosen pride over peace, and pride never slept quietly. In a small room deep under the tower, Kier sat at a console, flooded with encrypted messages. They had not been sleeping since the moment the Solace of Dawn had appeared. They had seen mercy made real, and it had changed something inside them. Now the council had authorized an even darker plan, one that would force Earth to surrender before its fleets could mobilize. They called it the Silent Hammer, an ancient weapon rebuilt from forgotten empire ruins, a world breaker that could hollow a planet with a single gravitational pulse. Kier read the report in disbelief. The target was not Earth directly, but a refugee world under human protection, a place filled with civilians and scientists from dozens of species. The speaker called it demonstration by example to show the galaxy what happens when humans defy order. Kier's hands trembled over the console. They thought of the human envoy's eyes. When he had said mercy before consequence, they remembered the shadow of the ship above the city that had chosen not to kill when it easily could have, and they understood that if the council went through with the Silent Hammer, there would be no more mercy left to choose. Kier opened a secure line hidden within maintenance frequencies and sent one message across the void coded in fragments of old Terran language. The message reached the Solace of Dawn and was received by Commander Ryan Vale himself. It said the council plans a strike on the refugee. World, you have little time. Ryan read the transmission in silence. His crew waited for his command. One of his officers asked permission to intercept immediately. But Ryan hesitated. He remembered the oath the Starborn were forbidden to strike first. Even in defense, unless every peaceful option had been exhausted, he said quietly, "If we move now, we may save lives, but we will shatter the line that holds the galaxy from chaos. If we wait, the Council will destroy itself upon its own actions, but millions could die." He stood at the observation deck staring at the swirl of the nearby nebula and whispered choices. Always cost. Back on the capital. The speaker stood before her advisors, wearing the expression of a queen before conquest. She said, "Once we activate the silent hammer, Earth will kneel and the myth of the Starborn will fade." Her counselors nodded, none daring to question the madness. Kier entered the room, pretending to bring new sensor reports. The speaker smiled thinly and said, "Officer, have you forgotten how to salute?" Kier bowed low, hiding their eyes behind the shadow of the visor, and replied, "Not forgotten. Only delayed." Elias Ward sensed the tension in the air. Even from his prison guards changed every few hours, but the rhythm of their movements betrayed unease. Through the narrow hallway came the sound of footsteps softer than metal. The door opened and Kier stepped inside, dressed in a guard's uniform. They whispered quickly, "There is little time. The council is about to fire the weapon. You must leave now." Elias looked at them with calm understanding and said, "If I escape, they will call it proof of guilt. But if I stay, they will call it weakness. What would you have me choose?" Kier said, "I would have you live, so the rest of us remember what courage looks like." They handed him a small transmitter and said, "This will open a corridor out of the city. There will be a ship waiting. It is not much, but it will fly." Outside, alarms began to sound distant, but rising. Kier pushed Elias toward the service hatch, saying, "Go while you can, and if you survive, tell your people that not all of us agreed." Elias paused for a moment and said, "Then walk with me. The stars are wide enough for redemption." Kier shook their head and smiled faintly. "I still have work to do." The solace of dawn moved through the folds of space, drawing closer to the refugee world. Its sensors detected the weapon platform already aligning its core. Ryan gave orders to project a barrier, but before it could stabilize, a signal reached them from the surface of the capital. It was Elias's voice, calm as ever. He said, "Do not fire, Commander. The line must hold. I will handle the council from within." Ryan clenched his fists, knowing that the envoy was walking into danger again, but he obeyed the oath inside the tower. Elias walked into the council chamber. Unarmed guards tried to stop him, but every weapon froze midair, as if the world itself refused violence. The speaker rose furious and shouted, "You are a prisoner. You have no right to stand here." Elias said, "I am human. That is right enough. The galaxy has chosen fear over faith again, but it is not too late. Stand down now, and history will remember mercy." The speaker sneered and ordered the weapon fired, but far above the capital. A light shimmered across the sky. The solace of dawn had arrived silently. Ryan had made his choice after all. He transmitted a single pulse that disabled every power grid around the weapon platform, freezing it mid-sequence. No explosion, no destruction. Only stillness across the council chambers. The power went out and the room fell into darkness. Elias looked up through the transparent ceiling and saw the faint glow of the Terran ship holding position above the clouds like a guardian. He turned to the speaker and said, "You see restraint, not weakness. This is what you could learn if you listened." She said, "You cannot save everyone human." He answered, "Perhaps, but I can try." Outside the city, lights flickered, back to life, and for the first time the people below cheered for Earth rather than fear it. Siege of the silent engine. The galaxy held its breath after the solace of dawn froze the Council's weapon. The image of the Terran ship above the capital spread across every network, every screen, and every whispering crowd across 1,000 worlds. People who had never spoken the name of Earth now said it with awe and fear. The speaker raged in her private hall, smashing her staff against the floor and swearing that humanity would pay for humiliating the Council. She summoned her generals and ordered the activation of the silent engine. The true planet killer The one weapon, even the Empire itself had sworn never to use it, was hidden deep, within the storm belts of a dead gas giant waiting for command codes locked by generations of secrecy. She said, "If the corridor of mercy is real, then let us test its limit. We will strike a world. They cannot afford to lose and see if restraint still holds, in the orbit of Earth." The Starborn fleet began to awaken ship after ship, rising from the ocean's deserts and the frozen poles, each one built for a war that had never come. Until now, the captains received a simple order from the Terran High Command: maintain the oath, protect without destruction, respond only to aggression. The Solace of Dawn remained the first sentinel. Ryan Vale stood upon his bridge, staring at the tactical display, showing the movement of fleets converging near the refugee world named Serena Prime. It was a quiet planet of green oceans and white clouds, home to millions displaced from other wars, many not even human. Rian whispered to his officers, "This is where the galaxy will decide if it still has a soul far below the clouds of Serena Prime children." Played unaware of the storms brewing in the heavens, they had seen the message from Earth weeks ago, and believed that the age of wars was ending. Marin, the teacher from Gantor's Edge, now lived among them as an advisor. She had been sent to help build new shelters. She looked at the sky and felt that old ache in her bones, the sense that peace was only the space between breaths. She turned. When she saw the shimmer of incoming ships and the glow of their engines breaking through the atmosphere, she knew before the alarm sounded that the Council had come again. The first wave of dreadnoughts positioned themselves above the planet, forming a cage of metal and fire. The silent engine moved behind them, hidden by storms, its gravity pulse building to critical mass. Commander Rian watched from the Solace of Dawn as his sensors detected the rising charge. The weapon would not only kill Serena Prime, it would tear a wound through space large enough to consume nearby systems. He gave the command to deploy the Corridor of Mercy. One last time, the Solace of Dawn broadcast across all channels a single phrase: cease hostilities. Neutral. Observation requested. Join the corridor and stand down. Across the attacking fleet, captains received the message. Some hesitated, remembering the stories of the last encounter. Others cursed and ignored it. Admiral Serac, the successor of Vark, shouted that no human threat would chain them again. He gave the command to fire the silent engine. Ryan closed his eyes and whispered, "Forgive me." Then he moved the Solace of Dawn forward, into the path of the gravitational pulse. Every deck shook as the energy bent space around them. The shields flared white, blinding every camera across the sector, and then silence. When vision returned, the silent engine had vanished. Not destroyed, but relocated far from the fleet, its core suspended in deep space, inert, its energy stolen by a field that should not exist. The Solace of Dawn floated at the center of it, unharmed, but surrounded by flickering light patterns like wings of silver flame. Ryan's voice echoed through every ship in the fleet. "This is consequence, not revenge. We do not kill. We end the need to kill, surrender and live, or strike again and vanish from history." The fleets one by one powered down their weapons engines, dimming as crews refused further orders. On the surface of Serena, Prime people watched the sky and saw the storm clouds open, revealing the Terran ship shining like a second sun. Marin held a child's hand and said softly, "They chose life this time." Above her, the soldiers of the Council began to send their distress signals, requesting asylum within the Terran corridor, unable to return to commanders who would call them cowards. The speaker received the news, and her fury turned to quiet terror. She understood now that every secret weapon, every fleet, every lie had been exposed, and her power was ending. Ryan opened a private channel to Earth. He said, "Target neutralized without loss, corridor stable, awaiting instruction." The reply came as a single-sentence broadcast, not just to him, but to every ship under the Terran flag. "The oath remains: no conquest, no vengeance, only consequence. Hold position until truth is seen." Rian felt a weight lift from his chest. The galaxy had just witnessed the end of domination disguised as order, and for the first time in centuries, a new kind of silence filled the stars. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of possibility. Kier watched from the Council Tower, where prisoners now guarded their captors. The speaker sat alone, staring at the horizon, knowing her empire was finished. Kier opened a transmission to the Solace of Dawn and said quietly, Commander, the Council stands down. The galaxy is listening. What will Earth say now? Ryan replied, Earth will say nothing. Earth will simply act so that no one ever needs to fear silence again. The Terran ship remained in orbit around Serena Prime, casting a long shadow over the clouds that looked less like a threat and more like a promise. The refugees below began to rebuild, not with dread, but with songs sung in 100 languages about mercy and strength bound together about the humans who carried storms in their hands and chose not to use them. And far beyond the edge of known space, the Starborn fleet continued to wake one ship after another as if the stars themselves had remembered their guardian's judgment and the oath. The war that never became a war ended not with a battle but with a silence so wide that it stretched across the spiral arm from the smallest moon to the oldest sun, the Council. Chambers once full of arrogance now echoed with the sound of footsteps and the hum of broken screens. The speaker, who had called herself the voice of order, sat in her chair staring at the hollow map that once showed her empire's reach. She had seen her fleet stripped of control, her weapons seized without destruction and her armies surrender without command, and now she waited for judgment, not from soldiers, but from the truth she had denied. Across the plaza outside the tower, thousands, gathered not in anger but in awe. They had watched the solace of dawn move through the sky like a blade of light, and instead of death bring stillness. The words corridor of mercy had been etched into every skyline and every heart people carried, banners of unity made from old flags once used in war. The air itself felt new, as if the universe had exhaled for the first time in ages. Kyr stood among the crowd, their uniform torn, but their eyes alive. They had risked everything to send that message to the Terran fleet, and now they saw what that risk had created. Elias Ward walked through the crowd without guards, the chains once on his wrist now gone. People stepped aside as if moved by an unseen wind. He climbed the steps of the Council tower where the speaker waited. The guards who remained lowered their weapons and turned away, unable to meet his eyes. He entered the chamber and stood before her. She looked up and said, "Do you come to gloat, human?" He shook his head and said, "I came to finish what you began." She laughed a hollow sound and said, "You think you have won? You will rule for a while and then you will become us. You will learn that power always becomes pride." He looked at her with calm patience and said, "Then perhaps the difference is that we remember what pride costs." The trial that followed was not called a trial by the Terrans. They called it the Council of Consequence. Representatives from every major world attended, including the new voices from the refugee colonies and the independent sectors. The speaker and her conspirators were accused not of losing a war but of choosing one. They tried to defend their actions with talk of balance and order, but the evidence shown by Kyr and the human envoys stripped away every excuse: recordings of secret meetings, blueprints of the silent engine. Even the falsified orders to raid Gantor's edge were displayed for all to see. When the speaker realized there was no argument left, she stood and said, "I did it for control because I feared a galaxy without chains." And Elias replied, "That is the difference between you and us. We build ships to protect what we love, not to control what we fear." The council dissolved itself that day, and in its place a new assembly was formed called the Concord of Life. Every member world was given an equal voice, including Earth. The first time in recorded history that humanity was not seen as an outsider, but as a foundation. The solace of dawn hovered in orbit above the capital, a symbol not of threat but of peace, and its image was used in every broadcast across the stars. Rian Vale and his crew were honored not as conquerors but as guardians, unseen watchers of balance. On Serena Prime, Marin the teacher watched as ships brought refugees home. She helped rebuild schools and told children stories of how the Starborn had come, not with vengeance but with light. She said, "Courage is not the roar of guns. It is the quiet choice to stand firm when the world expects you to break." And the children listened, their eyes wide with wonder. Kyr stood with Elias one evening as the twin suns set over the rebuilt city. They looked at the horizon, where Terran ships glittered like stars waiting above. Elias said, "When we sent that final message, we did not know if anyone would listen. Kier replied they did because it was not a threat. It was a truth. He smiled and said, "Truth is the one weapon that never rusts." Far away in the solace of dawn, Ryan stood on the deck and gazed. At the void now peaceful, the fleet was returning to their silent patrols, each ship destined to watch over a region of the galaxy, ensuring the oath remained. He activated the central transmitter, and his voice traveled across the spiral to every ship in every colony. He said, "The age of conquest is over. We are Starborn. Not because we seek war, but because we remember what it costs to forget mercy." And his words became the new pledge recited in every academy and every home where freedom mattered. On Earth, the oceans shimmered with reflected light from returning ships, the cities once scarred by old wars, now filled with song. The final message from Earth was written again upon the sky, not as a warning, but as a promise. It said, "Since you chose war, prepare for the consequences," and underneath it appeared a new line, "But if you choose peace, prepare for the stars." The phrase spread through the networks until even distant worlds began to repeat it as a blessing. The speaker lived out her days, in quiet exile, her empire gone, her voice forgotten. Yet sometimes she would look at the night sky and see a glimmer she could not name, and she would whisper that perhaps the humans had been right. Perhaps mercy was not weakness, but strength too, heavy for her to bear. Years later, the descendants of Gantor's Edge and Serena Prime would tell their children about the fleet that never fired the ship with no archive and the message that changed the galaxy forever. They would say the Starborn came not to conquer, but to remind us that freedom is not the absence of power, but the wisdom to use it gently. And above them, among the endless stars, the solace of dawn drifted on her silent course, her lights soft, her engines quiet, her crew watching. As worlds healed and lives began anew, and in the calm between heartbeats, the galaxy listened to the echo of the oath and believed once more that even among the darkness there could be light. The echo of the oath. The galaxy was quiet in a way it had not been for centuries. Stars shone without fear, planets spun without dread, and moons reflected the light of suns that had once watched fleets collide in vain. The solace of dawn drifted above the capital world, a sentinel that had never fired, a shot but had changed the course of history. Her hull shimmered like liquid silver, and every crew member knew that the weight of the Starborn oath rested not in destruction, but in restraint. Commander Rian Vale stood on the bridge staring at the endless dark. He felt the pulse of every world he had saved, and every life that had been spared. The corridors of the ship were silent, except for the hum of systems that carried the memory of every choice ever made by humans, and by those who swore to protect them. On the surface, the city had rebuilt itself from the ashes of fear. The people worked together to repair what was broken. They planted gardens on rooftops and taught children the stories of courage and mercy. Marin, the teacher from Gantor's Edge, walked among them, telling the youngest about the day when the sky opened, not in fire but in light. She said the humans came and chose life, and the children looked up at the horizon and felt hope in a way they could not explain. Elias Ward walked through the plaza without guards around him. The chains of accusation had been removed because no accusation could stand against truth. He looked at the people who had gathered in silent respect. He smiled faintly and whispered to Kier, who stood beside him, that sometimes the quietest choice carries the loudest echo. Kier nodded and said, "The galaxy will remember, because we remembered what it meant to be human and to be Starborn." In the council halls, the speaker watched from afar as the conquered of life formed a new assembly of representatives from every world she had sought control and power, and found only emptiness. Now she understood that strength did not lie in weapons or fleets, but in the wisdom to choose mercy over pride. She whispered to herself, "The Starborn oath is heavier than I can bear," and in her voice there was finally understanding. Across the spiral arm, the fleets of Earth moved silently between stars, each ship carrying crews who had trained not to kill but to protect every system they passed. They did not announce their presence. They did not demand obedience. They only observed and reminded the galaxy that choice always has a consequence, that power is only worthy when it serves life, and that mercy is not weakness but the greatest force a civilization can wield. Above Serena Prime, The twin suns set over oceans that reflected the light of countless ships and cities restored. The people danced and sang quietly under the warm skies. The beacon towers still glowed faintly in remembrance of those who had fought silently to protect them. The words "Corridor of Mercy" flashed one last time across every screen and lens, a promise and a warning that the Starborn would always watch, that humanity would always remember that the Oath would never sleep. Kira looked to the horizon, one hand resting on the console that had once held the encrypted messages, and whispered that the galaxy was no longer afraid of humans because humans had taught it to hope. Elias placed a hand on their shoulder and said, "We did not start a war. We ended the need for one." And together they watched the stars shimmer and bend, as if smiling back at them. The solace of dawn drifted onward, silently carrying the weight of centuries and the promise of the future. She moved between systems unseen yet always present. Her crew stood ready not for vengeance but for consequence. The galaxy breathed a long sigh, and for the first time, it felt the calm of true understanding, a calm born not from fear but from the knowledge that the Starborn Oath and humanity had spoken, and the universe had listened, and on every world from the smallest moon to the largest sun, the echo of the message repeated itself in wind and water and voices and hearts. Since you chose war, prepare for the consequences. And underneath it, a second line appeared, a line of hope for all who would hear. If you choose peace, prepare for the stars. And the words settled into the minds of every being, teaching that restraint is stronger than wrath and mercy greater than power. The end.